with the speaker from the Eastern Cape, the speaker from the Western Cape, from Gauteng, KZN, and from Limpopo. There are, who else is here now? And of course, we've got the former President Kgalema Motlanthe, and Dr. Chisano, and Dr. Aninka Tlassens, and Ms. Mithian. Dr. Mithian, how do I say this? I'm out of order. And from the high-level panel. What we are going to do, I just wanted to say to you that last year sometime, the Speakers Forum, Parliament and the 9 provincial legislatures commissioned this high-level panel. And I saw the former Auditor General, he's here as well. And Ms. Bridget Mabandla there, yes. Chifuta, Mr. Chifuta, and the part of the high-level panel. Last year, the Speakers Forum commissioned this panel to go and look at the impact of legislation. This was as a result of our discussions both in Parliament and in the Speakers Forum, that the Fourth Parliament had left as part of its exit report the necessity for the impact of legislation arising from reports of various committees and work of interaction with the public, asking us whether we do evaluate some of the legislation and the impact they were having, whether the resources we were plowing in were making the difference they were meant to make. And so this panel today, finally, we are glad that they presented the report to us as the Speakers Forum. So what's going to happen now, we will show you a bit of what happened during the work they were doing throughout the country, and just to get a sense and a glimpse of that work. And after that, I'll request former President Motlanthe to give us an overview of the work they have just presented to us. We will then move on to the next step. We'll talk about it later. Let's go on, guys. I'll disappear once it comes on. Whilst they are getting it sorted out, it's a video clip that will show. Let's acknowledge also His Excellency Ambassador Kulayev, Regional Dean for Asia, and representing His Excellency the EU Ambassador is Mr. Manuel Iglesias, First Chancellor. And of course, we must also, I guess, acknowledge the secretaries of the legislatures who are here with us as well, who provide an important administrative and managerial support to the leadership of the legislatures. Yeah.
The 1994 elections ushered in a new democratic order in our country. The massive participation proved beyond doubt that the majority of South Africans across racial lines wanted peace and freedom and a peaceful transition from apartheid to a democratic order. Since 1994, Parliament of South Africa has passed a significant body of legislation, including the Constitution, that affords dignity to every South African and recognizes all are equal. The laws passed have improved the lives of South Africans. Great strides have been made in the struggle to emancipate South Africa from poverty, inequality, and joblessness. However, much more still needs to be done. In its quest to follow up on its commitments to the people, the South African legislative sector, through the Speakers Forum, appointed a panel in January 2016 to assess the effectiveness of key legislation passed by Parliament and provincial legislatures since 1994.
As Speaker of the National Assembly, I have established an independent advisory panel on the acceleration of change and transformation.
The panel is chaired by former President Kgalema Motlanthe and consists of eminent persons representing various sectors of society.
The key purpose of the panel is to assess the efficacy of legislation against 4 identified areas. A, the triple challenges of poverty, unemployment, and inequality. B, the creation of and equitable distribution of wealth. C, land reform, restitution, redistribution, and security of tenure. And D, nation building and social cohesion.
The work of the panel affords the legislative sector the opportunity to assess past legislation in terms of the extent of implementation, the quality with regards to clarity and accessibility, its impact, and whether the intentions of the legislation are being met.
Well, the strength of the panel is that it is composed of individuals who come from the different sectors of society. The first thing that we must do is that where we are, we must spread the word. We must mobilize the stakeholders, inform them about the work of the panel, and mobilize them to participate in the platforms.
The 5th Parliament, this current Parliament, in its strategic plan, prioritized this assessment that a panel should be established which would then be tasked to or mandated to look into the efficacy of legislation, the quality of legislation, the implementation thereof, as well as the lived experience of South Africans of such legislation.
The panel conducted its work through public consultations across the 9 provinces that included public outreach and other research processes such as roundtable discussions, commissioned research from relevant organizations and experts, written submissions, and desktop research.
Anyone in the House can express themselves in the language of their preference because we have those interpretation devices. The experience we have in other provinces is that time runs out very quickly. And so if there are things that you would want to raise, I suggest you start noting them down. And if you don't have an opportunity to address them here, you can submit them into the tables that we have.
The historical inequalities continue. Both public and private health professionals do not come to the party in terms of servicing and supporting schools with many welfare difficulties that they are faced with on a daily basis.
As we go through the Constitution, there's somewhere that us as normal people don't benefit from it. We're discussing and saying that there's an act where they speaks of people who are thieves and all that, that if you kill them, you are at wrong. But this person is attacking you. Can it be reviewed? Can we be taught? Can we have workshops in the Constitution? General people must know what the Constitution is all about. The only rights we know is the ones that we use daily. If you abuse me, I will take you to the police. That's what we know.
Yes, the education is a problem. Within Kimberley and the school of Ruini, the Canars of Honey School to me, as a school to Hanala Cranny, the direct education at the Cranny. Alla loop die machine is bij school. Wat de probleem is, ik heb gezien met mijn eigen kind. Mijn kind en mijn zusters kan lopen die Mercedes. En bij die Mercedes school krijg je huiswerk elke dag. Bij mijn kindse school krijg je huiswerk op 1 dag. Die hele maths, English, Afrikaans, 1 dag. En het is een frustration om te kunnen leren zoveel werk op dezelfde tijd.
Ik 77 years. Rewaka uthokafetse ka 2005. Mo pabita tso mathata rona ke a. Re kolota metsi. Re kolota ditirelo. Na ha re a santsa a tshela nako ya o ramhala di pension. Ne re sa kolote metsi, ne re sa kolote ditirelo.
There are also positive attributes the law impacted our people.
Lento ukuthi iyasivuyisa siloluntu kakhulu kwi ground level because most of the time izinto ezilolu hlobo zifikelela only kwi-politicians nakwi-leaders. Now xa kubuyelwa back ke ngoku ufumaniseka into yobana ezi zinto asikwazi uzifumana thina kwi-ground level. So siyayibulela kakhulu iParliament xa ivule le opportunity yokokubana sizokwazi umela indawo zethu.
We hear that it's Kgalema Motlanthe. We were extremely excited because we knew that he's a man on the ground who will take this forward for us as the whole 9 provinces.
Among the challenges presented, there is a serious challenge with the traditional leadership laws and the Land Act, which were common across the provinces.
KZN is slightly different from other provinces in the sense that in other provinces you have, when you look at the land question, for instance, the land is owned by the state. And in this province, the Ngonyama Trust was established.
We've had a lot of people saying, as was said today, when the whites came, they didn't buy the land from us, so why should we have to compensate them to get the land back? So we've had broad questions of principle that address the legacy of dispossession and the inadequacy of current policy to really deal with that. But we've also had a lot of people coming and saying, I put in a claim to restitution, I've waited this many years, there's been no proper processing of my claim, or I put in a claim as a labor tenant, or I put in a claim as a farm worker. And so we're really looking at how specific laws have been implemented, how the budget for land reform has been spent, who it has benefited, and who's been left out, both in terms of class and race. And I think when we make recommendations, we're going to make them on the basis of specific findings about what's gone wrong in the implementation of the law, and where the gaps are in the law, and whether certain laws should be repealed. But it's also that comment that was made that these were meant to benefit the people, and the way they're being implemented benefits politicians rather than the people. I think we're hearing a lot of stuff like that as to where are the resources attached to these laws ending up compared with where they were intended to end up.
There are issues on land reform that are worrying to all of us in South Africa who are involved in agriculture. And there's no denying that the restitution process or the land reform process has virtually stopped to function. And it is easy to put blame somewhere. You can blame this, and you can blame government, and you can blame this organization and that organization. But in the end, that is not going to serve any purpose.
Motho se itekalla o ema mo start mole o kopa dishile wa re ntene hona dikokwantse di bona ba tla bona botshelo fono botshelo boyang hobane no yana ha ntsheba o sa sheba tebo o sa sheba bofofu o shebe botho ba ka pele ya leboga.
Question is the government, the private sector, organizations, institutions, and so forth ready to actually ensure that there is equality? I would say that from the government point of view, they've set up policies, laws, policies, and structures that are supposed to help to achieve equality. The question is it being implemented by all structures within the country? I do believe that we as South Africans, if we are prepared to ensure we have equality, all of us ought to be able to stand up and ensure that equality occurs. And we can do so clearly by ensuring that when we go to an educational institution, we demand good quality education. Because the good quality education is a base upon which we can be able to compete, regardless of the race or the sex, the gender, or, locality. So if we have very good education, we ought to be able to compete equally. Data currently does show that there is a lot of inequality with regard to the quality of education that our people are actually getting. So I would argue that we all need to play a role. We cannot leave it up to government only. The government has passed the laws and policies, and programs are there, structures are there to monitor. Now it's up to us.
First and foremost kan ek tog vra dat ons die statement net withdraw. Die wat ons elke keer sê net as blacks wat suffer. Ons as die colored communities, ek voel ons word neglect en ek voel ons word afgeskep en overlooked. Die second ding is unemployment. Ek is 'n jeugdige, ek het N6. Ek was daarom gelukkig om die NSFAS bursary te kry om verder te studie. Ek het N6, ek kry nie werke, hier is die internships, hier is die learnerships. Baie van die matrikulante in my community in. Ons is forced om by die mall te gaan werk. Baie van my mense is baie slim in my community. Hulle het baie skills en so aan. Maar ongelukkig due to a shortage of resources, ons kan niks doen nie.
Botlhoki bo ineile matla. Rona nna ke fumana pension. Ena godimo ga pension ke e kry-ang e tlhola e ka e shotile.
South Africa belongs to some and not everyone. You still do have in the new South Africa today coloreds, whites, black, and Indians. Then the question arises, are we not all Africans?
The lessons that we draw from these outreach programs are that, people share with us their lived experiences.
Today, the panel has gone full circle with a comprehensive report to the Legislative Forum. The report will be presented at relevant forum and stages of the legislative sector as feedback to the people.
Thank you very much. Let's give over to President Motlanthe. Please go ahead, sir.
Hey, you don't waste time. Thank you. Let me wear my reading glasses. Thank you, Program Director, Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly, Lechesa Tsinodi, Honorable Speaker and speakers of the legislatures, my fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen, today is a very special day in the sense that we will be handing over the report of the high-level panel that was established in December 2015. And of course, it's also a special day because some earth-shattering events are taking place next door, north of Limpopo. But let me begin by thanking the Speakers Forum for embarking on this immense but necessary initiative to review post-apartheid legislation. This offers an opportunity to pause and reflect on the astonishing achievement of a functioning constitutional state in what was once bitterly divided country led by an oppressive government. The process of the high-level panel was not a clinical examination of the nation's post-apartheid legislative effort behind closed doors. Instead, over a period of 21 months, the high-level panel traversed the country's 9 provinces to hear firsthand from the people an account of their experience of the laws passed by the democratic state. The public hearings were attended by at least 10,000 people. Ordinary people attended in large numbers and spoke about their lives eloquently and movingly. This was a conversation with the people about their expectations, their achievements, but also their disappointments. In the hearings, we heard of examples of corruption by state officials and politicians in relation to land, housing, and access to social grants. Names and specific examples were given and recorded. People described the consequences of dysfunctional hospitals and broken schools, family members who died unnecessarily, and children with no hope of passing exams. we heard of farms going to officials and politicians rather than to the people who had claimed them or applied for them. The panel also received numerous submissions from individuals, non-governmental organizations, academics, industry associations, and many other organizations. The panel commissioned research from experts to help us think through the issues, and in addition, small consultation roundtables and workshops were held to delve deeper into certain issues. The substantial record that has been generated by this work is available online. The evidence presented shows that the ills of the past are being reproduced in post-apartheid society despite extensive legislative reform. It is important to note that the evidence also highlights some improvements in outcomes, but the observed changes have not dented the deep inequities in the quality of the services received in many instances, nor have they made fundamental shifts in outcomes. The recommendations presented here in this report, which cover specific legislation and the state of execution and governance, offer some direction in relation to how to bring about accelerated change in relation to poverty and inequality, land reform and social cohesion and nation building. In some instances, the legislative interventions recommended by the panel are specific and urgent to address urgent societal problems, or because the panel has identified problems with bills that are currently before Parliament. In other instances, the panel recommends integrated process-based approaches to cross-cutting, deeply embedded problems such as the legacy of spatial inequality. In the face of this deeply problematic state of the nation, the panel proposes the key interventions summarized below to accelerate fundamental change. The country needs to build human capabilities to enable economic participation, social cohesion, and engaged citizenry. On access to quality education and skills, the panel would like to see a renewed focus on government building a public education and training system that equips all South Africans with the basic capabilities to participate in a modern, rapidly evolving economy. The panel makes recommendations that focus on improving the governance of schools and the skills of teachers and principals. Legislation and oversight should address itself to delivering a system worthy of learners' potential and aspirations, irrespective of socioeconomic status. The panel's recommendations also direct efforts towards sharpening tools for skills development post-school and involving the private sector in delivering workplace learning. On access to quality health care, the population is settled with the quadruple burden of disease, that is HIV and AIDS and tuberculosis, high maternal, neonatal, and child morbidity and mortality, the rising prevalence of non-communicable disease, and high levels of violence and trauma. Though the public health system provides basic health care services to all, there are serious deficiencies in the quality of care that is provided. The health system is also bifurcated between a private healthcare system and a tax-financed public sector system. There are strengths and weaknesses in both systems, but the panel supports the introduction of national health insurance, that optimizes the public and private resources of the country to achieve universal health care coverage for all. On wealth redistribution, South African society is a standout when it comes to levels of both income and asset inequality. The democratic state has delivered a progressive tax system with a focus on income and consumption taxes and some taxes on wealth. Though income clearly influences access to opportunities, wealth is more stable over time, and significant wealth can perpetuate itself for generations. The panel supports measures to deepen existing wealth taxes. The country needs to accelerate economic growth, and therefore barriers to entry into the economy must be removed. The South African economy is highly concentrated. The country is also struggling to overcome anti-competitive behavior, particularly collusion, some of which is the legacy of apartheid-era economic policy. The panel would like to see the economy opened up for participation by the formerly excluded to support meaningful small enterprise and high potential entrepreneurship. Parliament should enact amendments to competition legislation that strengthen the powers of economic regulators to promote competition. South Africa must break the spatial legacy of apartheid, which separates the majority of people from economic activity and does not allow informal forms of activity to thrive where people are, and traps disadvantaged communities in poverty and underdevelopment, creates inefficient cities, and robs poor rural people of secure livelihoods. The panel makes recommendations that seek to break this damaging spatial pattern. This demands an integrated solution that goes beyond the mandate of any one government department or specific level of government. Thus, the panel recommends creating a structure that can operate and craft solutions in an integrated fashion, while also recommending some specific urgent interventions. The panel also makes recommendations for the enactment of laws to recognize and administer a continuum of land rights. Finally, the panel makes recommendations that aim to rectify problematic legislation that perpetuates insecurity of tenure in rural areas. There is a need to develop or sharpen instruments to finance high-growth economic activities through appropriate financing. Lack of access to finance is a common refrain by new and small business operators. The panel recommends legislative efforts to support the advancement of capital to new or small businesses, with emphasis on equity and royalty-based financing schemes in addition to loans. We need meaningful land reform that recognizes property rights of the poor and previously excluded. The panel urges Parliament to enact a new framework law for land reform. New legislation is needed to provide a coherent framework for the various components of land reform, with a focus on pro-poor redistribution. Evidence presented to the panel shows how land reform policy has drifted from its initial pro-poor focus to one marked by signs of elite capture. Implementation has also been dysfunctional. To ensure that land reform delivers the land rights set out in the Constitution, the panel recommends that Parliament enacts framework legislation that addresses the deficiencies of law and policy. Parliament should amend the Restitution of Land Rights Act of 1994 in ways that address current capacity, resource, and accountability constraints before July 2018, the Constitutional Court struck down a 2014 amendment to the Act in 2016. Parliament was given until the 28th of July 2018 to enact new legislation. The poor outcomes and slow pace of restitution has been confirmed by numerous government reports. The public hearings testified to the divisions and disappointments restitution has created in the communities on the ground. The panel identifies lack of capacity, inadequate resources, and failures of accountability as key constraints that must be urgently addressed. The private members' amendment bill currently before Parliament fails to engage with these constraints. The panel puts forward legislative amendments to address the problems it identified. The country needs to recognize, record, and administer effectively a continuum of rights to land. There are too many South Africans in rural and urban areas who have insecure tenure to the property that they occupy. In urban areas, programs such as RDP housing have failed to transfer title to beneficiaries. The panel proposes the creation of a robust land recording system that captures a continuum of rights in property. Parliament should put measures in place to ensure equal citizenship rights for urban and rural people under municipal councils. In the process of developing this report, the panel learned that the National Assembly passed the Traditional Leadership Governance Framework Amendment Bill and referred it to the NCOP for concurrence on the 22nd of August 2017. The panel calls for an urgent review of these bills, including specifically the Traditional and Khoisan Leadership Bill that is currently being debated by the Portfolio Committee on Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, based on the public contributions received by the panel. Current and proposed legislation on traditional leadership denies people living in areas under the traditional leaders several constitutional rights, distinguishing them from those living in the rest of the country who enjoy the full benefits of post-apartheid citizenship. Such legislation also poses a threat to social cohesion by entrenching and promoting ethnic identities. Comments made by members of the public at hearings indicated clear concern about the different conditions under which people in areas under traditional leaders and those living elsewhere in South Africa. Parliament must exercise effective oversight to improve legislation and implementation. A recurrent theme emerging from research, public voices, and expert roundtables is that while good laws have been made, failed implementation has resulted in poor outcomes. This raises the question of how the executive is able to get away with poor implementation. The panel is of the view that part of the answer lies in the narrow interpretation by Parliament of its powers of oversight. The panel would like to see a more active Parliament, one that ensures the strict enforcement of penalties for lack of performance by the executive. Parliament should also facilitate meaningful and effective public participation in the legislative and policy-making cycle. A process should be in place to appoint key officials in a transparent manner. The challenge of implementation is also linked to the capabilities and values embodied by key leaders at state institutions. Parliament should consider a system that incorporates public participation and parliamentary oversight for certain categories of appointments to public office to increase independence and accountability to achieve the objectives of a capable developmental state. The legislative process should be overhauled. There have been a series of judgments from the Constitutional Court about the need for effective public participation in the legislative process. The panel is concerned about repeated failures to sufficiently engage those directly affected through inclusive public hearings as evidenced by these judgments. Many experts also warn of developing laws in silos rather than adopting a cross-sectoral and integrated approach to deep-seated structural problems such as spatial inequality. Parliament currently appears over-dependent on government departments to develop bills, which reinforces the problem of siloed interventions. The panel recommends that more use be made of ad hoc committees spanning several interconnected areas and to strengthen legal drafting capacity in Parliament. The accountability of Parliament to the public should be strengthened by more direct linkages between members of Parliament and their constituencies. The feedback loop from communities to legislation depends in part on the electoral system in place. The panel recommends that Parliament should amend the Electoral Act to provide for an electoral system that makes it, The panel recommends that Parliament should amend the Electoral Act to provide for an electoral system that makes members of Parliament accountable to defined constituencies on a proportional representation and constituency system for national elections. In conclusion, the panel humbly submits that the report should be processed in a manner which translates into a clear program of action for implementation. And I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Ndati Motlanthe. We now have to do, you have to come back, sir, so that you hand over in public the report that you've been dealing with in private. Yes, yes. So where's the report? It's coming. Madam Speaker, you are the recipient. See, Madam Chairperson is not here to join you, so you better come.
Oh, Madam Speaker, this is the report of the high-level panel, and I suggest that you open it, otherwise you'll have to declare it, because people may live under the impression that it's a gift. It's a gift. Yeah, thank you. I'll hold the ribbon.
I'll take that.
Thank you. Okay. There you are. Yeah. There you are. Yeah. It's inside. Yeah. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Madam Speaker, I'll have that.
Okay.
You're still doing program directing.
Yeah.
Still program directing.
Madam Speaker will respond to the former president.
Program Director, members of the stakeholders that have been invited and are represented here tonight, members of the diplomatic corps, members of the media, my colleagues from the Speakers Forum, the high-level panel led by the former President Motlanthe. Good evening, and thank you for being here. For us, it's been a great day. We've spent the whole day from 9 o'clock. No, to be honest, it was 10 when we finally started listening to detailed, very good, in our view, qualitatively, reports from not just the chairperson of the high-level panel, but also from chairpersons who are sitting here, who've been chairing the 3 working groups of the high-level panel. We are very, very impressed as the Speakers Forum by the depth of insights and the thoroughness with which members of the panel planned, executed, engaged in a thorough process on the various issues about which they sensitized us today. Because we've just received the report today, and of course you saw me getting the formal report only now in front of you, we are not in a position to engage on the content of the report. What we as the Speakers Forum have agreed is that the first thing is for us to take the reports back to our institutions. Back at our institutions, together with our colleagues and our caucuses, we will then fine-tune how best we parcel out areas of the report for implementation and further analysis. And we would therefore be in a better position to come back and be able to engage better on the contents of the report, perhaps in the new year, because we have to say that it's been a very busy year. We are towards the end of it, and there's a lot that's happening. We look forward to a very enriching reading of the report in the next few weeks. So we are taking the report back to our constituency, and that is the legislative sector, and we will, together with our colleagues back there, get our marching orders as to what's the next step for us. We must also say that having initially conceived the terms of reference, we are very satisfied with the way the panel handled each of those areas that had been given to them. We can only say right now that, in particular, in the areas of the continuing inequalities, poverty, and unemployment, there's a lot that has to be done. The other area that we believe there's going to be a lot of work to do from our legislative sector perspective would be on land reform. It's very clear that much as the Constitution had given us the initial framework to guide how we proceed with the land reform, the pace has been slow and there's a lot to be done. For us, this is a very important area of work because it's at the basis of how we would be able to make progress in terms of indeed making fundamental difference in the daily lives of our people, in particular socio-economically, to qualitatively change the realities of our people on a daily basis, in particular in rural, underdeveloped areas. Even as we talk about the radical economic transformation, let us be guided by how we respond to the needs of the poorest in our society. And so even as we read the report, we know where our priorities lie, we know where we are looking for detail or pointers as to where to go to get more perspective, to get more understanding, and to make sure that even as in the next 18 months before we go to the electorate again, we would be ready to come back to them addressing the issues that matter to our people. So as I was saying, we will, when we have read the report, be wiser, be more ready, be clearer in our minds as to what's the agenda for the next term. And when we finalize our legacy report in the next 18 months, we would feel that we've done the best that we could in our term and empower the 6th Parliament in the next term. And so we go away back to our desks being satisfied that whatever resources, energy, and time that was spent on the work that is contained in this report was worth every minute, was worth every cent. And therefore it is with pleasure that we will also pass copies of the report to each of the provincial legislatures. And by the time we come back early in the year, the legislatures would also be ready to inform how we understand the priorities of every corner of South Africa, and therefore allow that to also shape the program and the agenda of the next cycle. Program Director, with those few words, I would like to say thank you very much for the work that has been done by the panel. We will next year be ready for them to be deployed yet again in order for them to engage more with stakeholders, with the public, but not right away. Because by the time we deploy them to those engagements, we ourselves should be knowing the detail of the report. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Ndate Moloto, this is your agenda now. I'm going to pass it on to you. I'm conflicted. We are now going to give Mr. Mloto to conduct what we call a media engagement. This is what he calls it here. But it's an opportunity for you to ask questions and so on. Yeah, go ahead.
No, thank you, Deputy Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the final part of the program, which is media and stakeholder engagement. To engage with you with regard to the launch and as well as the report today, the panel is constituted of the representatives of the Speakers Forum, and as well as the representatives of the panel that came out with the report that is being launched today. So the representatives of the Speakers Forum, they are led by the Speaker of the National Assembly, who is also the chairperson of the Speakers Forum, Mebaleka Mpete. And I'll start from the very end with the Speaker of Limpopo Legislature, Me Bushielo, followed by the Speaker of the KZN Legislature, Me Johnson, and the Speaker of the Gauteng Legislature, Me Mekgwe, and the Speaker of the Western Cape Legislature, Me Fernandez, and the Speaker of the Eastern Cape Legislature, Me Gifford. Now, the panel is led by the chairperson of the HLP, who just presented the report now, the former president, President Kgalema Motlanthe, and accompanied, of course, by the chairperson of the Working Group 1, Dr. Olof Shisana, and the chairperson of the Working Group 2, Dr. Claessens, and the representative of Working Group 3, Dr. Mithian. So they are here to engage with your good self with regard to whatever issues that you would like to raise, and in terms of the media, whatever questions that you would like to raise. I'm told, esteemed panelists, that there are about 4 lapel mics that are currently off. If we can just double check if they are off so that we can put them on, because you will be speaking from your seat. I'll be the only one who is standing here. So the questions and comments that will be coming, you'll engage with them from your seat. So let's just make sure that all the lapel mics are on. Yeah, I can hear one is already on, indicating that we are ready to go. So, ladies and gentlemen, there are roaming mics all over the room, the hall. So you just raise your hand and indicate the name, your name as well as the name of the organization that you are representing, and we will note you. So I'm officially opening now this engagement and the first round of hands. Is there any hands? I can see from the back, there's the first hand. You'll be the second, ma'am. You'll be the third. Any further hand? The fourth one. If I can't see some of the people at the back because of the strength of the lighting here.
Right
here. Here, yes, you'll be the fourth. Is there any further hand? Or are we close with 4 for this round? Okay. Going once, twice, gone. All right. So can we take those 4 hands as the first round? In that order. Hand number 1. Where's the mic?
He's got
You've got the mic. Okay, yes. You go ahead, sir.
Thanks, Ntate Moloto. My name is Lawrence. Bada is my surname. I come from Sanako, the movement of cooperatives in South Africa. My question is, whilst you are taking the parliament to the people, are you trying to come with the strategies to address their challenges? I think you can see the highly unemployment people staying on the streets, and people are there to say, we are ready to work together through cooperatives. And what the support that you give for the people who are ready to do things for themselves, for the interest of the country and for themselves. But we are not seeing any impact at all. Whilst you are saying, I think I'm challenging you, the chair of the panel, as well as the speaker. Of course, maybe in the legislations, when you are saying you are taking parliament to the people, but high employment is increasing, and the buildings of the government are empty and used for wrong reasons. That can be used for factories and industrialization, and for other reasons for development. But we are saying you are taking the parliament to the people. And can we see the results of that? But I want to commit here as the president of cooperatives that we are ready to work with you to get solution together by acknowledging and supporting what we are trying to do for ourselves, not dependent on the government, but also supporting on the actions and initiatives that we are taking. And whatever we do, we put our people first. And we are saying, whilst you are seeing that, can you do something about that? And I think I must say the following today, Chair. I was in Nedlec today. The basic education came to Nedlec to present. We are saying you look at the schools where the high level of those who are able and not able is continuing. Those who are able, the way the schools are, those who are able to take the schools to the townships, to the towns, suburbs, and so on. Can't you suggest, can we stop a little bit to improve the schools in the suburbs and towns, focus in the rural areas, where schools, people are learning under the trees, where our children dying on the toilet, and we are saying we're a government. But I do not want to go further, but I'm saying positively, can we take, say, we've seen the schools, other schools have got infrastructure, computers, and so on, but we're still bumping funds there instead they've got budget. Can't we just a little bit, maybe we send for 3 years, go and address those schools there. Go to the clinics, go to the hospitals. I'm saying, when you take the parliament to the people, let's listen to them, let's work with them, let's move with them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Hand number 2.
Thank you, Chairperson. I'm raising my hand today not because I wanted to be seen to be talking in this panel, but because I'm one of the affected.
Yes, ma'am. Can you begin with your
My name is Constance Mogale. I am working for the Alliance for Rural Democracy. And I'm happy today that this report is finally out. I've been waiting with anticipation, and I have been worried to see bills going through Parliament without waiting for recommendations of this Parliament, of this panel. And I want to congratulate the speakers for setting up this panel, because I nearly lost hope in South Africa, in the new South Africa, to say, are we short of skills of drafting bills that is going to bring us the vision, the alternative vision that we anticipated as South Africans when we drafted the Constitution of South Africa. That vision that we were hoping for was the vision to make sure that every South African, irrespective of race, class, and gender, is going to enjoy the benefits of democracy. But what we see, the vision that we see that is being projected is the vision that marginalizes the rural citizens to be subjects and second-class citizens who are subjects to traditional leaders and don't have choice. So what I hope from the speakers, when they receive this report, I listened to Ms. Baleka Mbete when she said she listened from 9 o'clock up to 4 o'clock, and I hope she understood. She listened and understood that we are still looking for that alternative vision that says the parliament may give a role to traditional leaders, and they need to clarify what is that role. And what we see as rural citizens is us being subjected and being taken out to the whole South Africa, being treated like other citizens, like a country inside another country. So we are hoping that they have listened and understood, and we are hoping to see the bills that are going to bring that alternative vision that we all have hoped for when we said Nkosi Sikelela Africa, when we said one country, one nation. So we don't want, as rural people, to be taken, to be stripped of that right to choose. The right to choose how we want our land to be governed, the right to choose how we want how to use our land, the right to make our own livelihoods. Because the bills that we see is giving powers to the traditional leaders, powers to the politically connected people, powers that strips us of our land rights, powers that are not recognizing our customary land rights. And I don't have a question. What I'm hoping is that we start redrafting, we start from the drawing board and say, what was the vision of the new South Africa when we said, let's start a new South Africa, let's demolish the boundaries that was created by the apartheid South Africa, let's give our people hope. So for us, this report represents hope, and we hope, we really hope that the new transformation that everybody's talking about, the new radical transformation that everybody's talking about is going to reflect the recommendations of this report. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Constance. Sounds like a comment, but I'm sure that panel members will might want to also respond to that with a comment of their own. Third hand.
Sorry. My name is Sabelo Masinga. Engaging the people with Parliament, what are you trying to achieve by doing that? Because on my own knowledge, I find that it's the MPs that stands for the people. Or perhaps you saw that there is a gap between the MPs with the people. So you brought the people closer in order for you to get much deeper understanding of what the problems are there. So what is you guys trying to achieve in engaging the people with the Parliament where they've got their own AMPs? That's my question.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sabelo. The fourth hand, if we can get a mic in front, okay.
My name is David Musoma. I'm the Deputy Chair of CRL Rights Commission. First, I want to commend the panel for sterling work done by producing the report that is before us. The CRL contributed in the area of social cohesion, and I think some aspects of our contribution are in the report as well. And I'm saying that this report is an important barometer because it's an encapsulation of the challenges and problems that we're facing in the country. My question is, in the course of your going around, hearing people speak to you or you speaking to them, what would be the single thing which...
Those were the 4 questions. The chairperson of the panel and the chairperson of the Speakers Forum, I think, might want to direct. How do we take them?
All right. Let me start with the last question from Professor David Musoma. The one common issue that was raised very sharply throughout all the public hearings in all provinces is the land question. And we believe that to the extent that the many of our people do not have title to the ground that they occupy, it's therefore important for this issue of land reform, restitution, redistribution, and security of tenure to be addressed once and for all. It would be a catalytic intervention which would give rise to many people who are without assets to have assets. And the report details how that should be handled. So I think that's the one single issue that came across, consistently in all the provinces here.
Any additions from working group?
Yeah, I think I'd like to take a question related to...
Seems like the lapel is off.
The mic is off. Is it on? Yeah, it's on. It's on.
Okay. One question that has been raised is the question of agriculture. We, as a panel,
Sorry, Dr. Zana. Can we get a mic?
Yeah, it's on. It's on.
It's on.
One issue that we deliberated on, amongst many, is the question of agriculture. Thank you. It's a question of agriculture. We deliberated on this issue extensively. And the reason for that is because agriculture in South Africa is not contributing significantly to GDP or even to generating jobs. So we felt that we should make a recommendation, to the country that the government should actually help to capitalize agriculture as well as develop agro-processing to the extent that it can absorb more people. In other words, it could create about 450,000 jobs and be able to generate about 160 billion rand, in the economy. If you compare to the proportional population that's actually working in agriculture in South Africa compared to other countries, you find that we're not doing so well. And I'm talking about comparing to countries that are similar to ours in terms of economic level. And then the other issue that has been raised was the question of listening to people. When we went around the provinces and listened to, the public, people had an opportunity to tell us a lot about how they see, how they perceive South Africa, how the policies are affecting them, how the laws are affecting them. And what we heard is that the implementation of the laws is a big challenge. They feel that, well, the laws might be good, but the implementation is not good. And therefore, they are suffering. They feel that they are poor. They are feeling that there's a lot of inequality that is happening. They are unemployed. And we used that information and tested it against the evidence from science. And we found that they were actually telling us the real issues, that the problems they were saying were real. They were not just a few people that felt that way, but it was much more of a bigger problem in our country. Consequently, we integrated the voices of the people into the report and ensured that we made recommendations that specifically address those concerns that they have. Thank you.
For me, one of the standout issues was people saying that they feel disrespected by government. They feel taken for granted by government, and they feel that they can't hold government to account. And I think that the thing that would make the greatest difference would be if actually government were held to account and Parliament were in a stronger position to ensure that government is held to account and that the laws that have been implemented are enforced, and especially the protections in law that were designed to really protect the poor, some of which have been blatantly ignored.
Thank you. In relation to the last question on what would be a single thing that would move the needle, I want to add to the comment by our chairperson about the land issue by adding economic growth. It has become very clear in our public hearings that unless we address those critical challenges of poverty, inequality, and unemployment, there can be no single nation and a single country that we envisaged under the Constitution. So the economic engine has to be fixed, and therefore Parliament has to begin to have a very robust oversight to ensure that that happens. I want to address the issue of taking Parliament to the people. Why would we do that? And it is about public participation, and we know that public participation is a critical engine that in fact is an indicator of the quality of our democracy. Now, to have that effective public participation, it means that we have to have an informed citizenry. People need to understand the laws and how it affects their lives. But it equally requires that government has to be transparent in providing the information that ordinary citizens need to make quality choices. And it has a critical bearing on social cohesion because it deals with the public trust in our institutions and in government. So unless we get more and effective public participation in our lawmaking, we will have created a considerable social deficit, and that spells very badly in terms of social cohesion. And then lastly, on the issue of the traditional leaders, this panel has made it a very strong appeal to Parliament to examine traditional leaders and Khoisan leaders' bill and to withdraw that and go back to the drawing board in relation to its constitutionality. The fact that it deals with different traditional leaders in an asymmetrical and an unequal fashion. And again, the fact that differences that entrench tribal identities and ethnic identities, again, would be an inhibitor to building that single nation and that single country, strong social cohesion, and one strong nation as envisaged by the Constitution.
Thank you. Thank you. Still a question. Okay. Any comment from the side of the Speakers Forum? Okay. The Speaker of Gauteng Provincial Legislature.
Yes, I want to add on the issue of why do we take Parliament to the people. As we are aware that we are celebrating the birth of the Constitution of the Republic, but also the birth of the National Council of Provinces. And our country is a constitutional democracy. The tenets of constitutional democracy is to ensure that people have a voice in whatever is done by those that they've elected. So taking Parliament to the people is one of those platforms where we go to the people, listen to them, and as and when they raise issues, we need to act on those particular issues. MPs, MPLs, they can do that, but also as institutions, which are led by the speakers, fortunately, we have to do that. It's not a nice thing to do, but it's in the Constitution. We are obliged by the Constitution of the Republic to ensure that it works for the people of South Africa. Therefore, as that particular platform, as explained, to say public participation is a way of doing it and taking Parliament to the people, because many a times people can't, if I were to speak for people from my province, going to Cape Town could be a challenge on its own, especially when you look at the issues that were raised by the panel to say some of the people are poor, they are unemployed, therefore they can't even afford transport money to fly in and out of Cape Town. So it is important that we must go to where people are and talk to the people. When, as the Speakers Forum, we took a decision to ensure that we have a high panel or high-level panel to actually ensure that they follow up on those issues, it was based on the issue that people are coming to our legislatures, they are coming to Parliament to complain about this and that. But we're asking ourselves a question to say, if parliaments and legislatures are law-making bodies, and we do have laws, what is wrong with those laws? So that where there are gaps, we must ensure that we close those gaps, we take those issues to where they belong, but also facilitate the process of ensuring that these laws actually respond to the needs of our people. So basically, that's the other reason.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Is there any further take? Okay. I see Dr. Shisana. You want to go first, Honorable Kifit? Yes. Yeah, you go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, Program Director. Let me add my voice on the question, which was more of a comment about the report being an important barometer. It is not just an important barometer, but an honest reflection. I think one of the reasons why the Speakers Forum decided on the high-level panel, it was to ensure that we receive honest opinions, honest reflections, and from people who have great expertise, who will be able to say, as they are analyzing what people are saying, they would be also able to assist with the kind of recommendations that they have come up with. And I believe the report has about 90 or more of such recommendations, which is why we must go back to work on those recommendations. And therefore, the purpose must never be lost. It is for us to improve on what we do. It is about us conducting introspection, but allowing that introspection not to be subjective, but it must be an objective introspection. Thank you, Program Director.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Dr. Shisana wanted to add.
I just wanted to add my thoughts on this issue of the one thing that really we can do in order to improve, the lives of our people and to get the country back on track. I think personally, if Parliament were to have the power or to use the power that they have in the Constitution to initiate legislation, instead of leaving it for the executive to actually do that, and use the power they have to allocate resources to support those pieces of legislation that they would have come up with, we probably would have improvement in terms of implementation of many of those programs that arise from those pieces of legislation. I think if we did that, it would be a radical change in the way in which we are running this country, because they'll be able to hold the executive accountable to whatever it is that they've decided on in the legislation. And that's something that I think ought to be considered by Parliament.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shisana. Judging by the first round, it seems like there is a high level of satisfaction with regard to the clarity. So perhaps we should take the last round. I see there should be a hand behind those cameras. Okay, so the hand in front, behind those cameras, yeah, you will be the first. And then the second one? Here. Okay, you'll be the second. And then you'll be the third hand. You'll be the fourth. Any fifth hand? Have I not recognized you? Oh, okay. So I've recognized what? 5 hands. Any other hand? Because this is the last round. So it's the last opportunity to raise whatever issue. Okay, so it's 5 hands. All right, thank you very much. The first hand.
Thank you very much. Good evening. My name is Letitia Knight. I'm the CEO of the Center for Municipal Research and Advice. And I have 2 points for consideration. The first one is around the extent to which you foresee that local governments will be engaged in developing the response plan to the recommendations that have been made by the high-level panel. I think particularly because the solution will not only lie in reforming legislation, but translating it into actual policy and practice. And with issues such as spatial transformation and land reform, I think local governments will be quite instrumental. I also would like to raise that perhaps this is an opportunity to maximize this process, to use the integrated development plans for what it was initially intended to be. Because it was never intended to be a plan or a tool for municipalities alone, but a tool for integrated planning by all spheres of government and all sectors of government. My second input is around the issue of strengthening agriculture produce. I don't know if you have followed, but the latest Armstrong economics findings have indicated that the predictions of climate change have actually taken a turn, and I think we might have experienced this in the change of weather, that we're not facing global warming, but we might be facing global cooling. And what happens when we face global cooling, that has happened previously, is that the agriculture production becomes impacted negatively. So it is probably an opportunity, since this is a key issue that is addressed in the report, to see how we can fast track the implementation of the Agri-Parks program ran by the Department of Rural Development and Land Reform to get more and more people productive and perhaps position our country as one of the countries that might have access of surplus when there is need for agriculture produce. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the second hand was here.
Thank you. Leon Lowe, Free Market Foundation. I join those who applaud the speakers and the panel for this work and look forward to its implementation. I wasn't going to say anything, but I couldn't resist after hearing so much about the need for public participation. Very welcome. It's a requirement of Section 195 of the Constitution. You stressed it as the single most important matter. Just draw to your attention that as an example of the problem, you face one right now today. On Friday, a bill was presented to Parliament, the Communications Amendment Bill, which has extremely far-reaching implications. It followed a white paper which had very far-reaching implications, none of which were tabled or discussed in the public participation that preceded the white paper. Where this is going is that the bill allows 1 month for comment for something that has implications for absolutely everybody, and I mean everybody. This is all about broadcasting, mobile data, telecommunications. I think, as Dr. Shizana will know, that this in the future will be everything to do with health and much, much more, the so-called Internet of Everything. So I just would encourage you to implement it immediately, because clearly something of this kind cannot be meaningfully publicly responded to in a month, the month leading up to the festive season. None of the, I just as it happened today, called the people in the tech world, the people who should be the first to know, the experts and the journalists in the field. Not one of them even knew that there was a bill. And so I would applaud and welcome, and just want to say your work should actually start tomorrow, and say this particular bill is an example of what all of you have said should not be happening. And it's nothing to do with what's in the bill. It's to do with what you all said, that for there to be meaningful public participation, and if I may add, in order to comply with Section 195, which says that, and you have other bills which have also, during the festive season run-up, given 1 month for comment, this one being particularly complex, 120 pages, very complex, far-reaching implications, changing cutting-edge technology into the future. So I would encourage you to do what you all say needs to be done as speakers. And again, I join those who applaud you for the initiative and the work.
Thank you very much, sir. The third hand, sir.
Sorry. Thank you. It's Lemloy, Catalytic Business Review. I wanted to check here. I'm happy Leon Lowe is here. And I wanted to check here. I've not engaged the report, but to understand what is the role of private sector on this, because I haven't heard you speaking about that. Because if you speak about problems of inequality, chances are the problem that we are facing is runaway capital. So I would like to understand, do you have a clear role for business and civil society? And what are the terms of engagement in those partnerships, if you have? Thanks you.
Thank you. Fourth hand.
I'm here.
Oh, yeah.
I'm actually going to speak to the recommendation. The chairperson of the HLP said there's one recommendation. Actually, I'm sure there are others.
Can you just start by your name?
I'm Sandton from South Reliance Institute.
Okay, thanks.
The chairperson of the high-level panel said, spoke to one recommendation, which is about constituency-based elections. So I actually wanted to find out first if this came out from the public participation itself, like is it a voice from below where people were recommending that we should consider maybe going a constituency-based election route? But also, I would like to hear, because it's now being recommended, I would love to hear what are the considerations and maybe what's a critique of the current list system. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think we've got the last hand. That was the fifth hand. I think it's, yes, sir.
Thank you. My name is Peter Setou. I am the Chief Executive of Vumelana Advisory Fund. Vumelana Advisory Fund is a non-profit organization that assists beneficiaries of land reform to develop their land. We do that through really funding transaction advisory services so that we can mobilize investment. I would like to start off by really thanking the Speakers Forum, our Parliament, for having really taken this important step. I think this is long overdue. And secondly, I would like to express my gratitude to the panel for being thorough in undertaking this work. As Vumelana, we did participate in this process. Perhaps our contribution to this specific piece of work has been through the presentation of the land future scenarios, which is really the scenarios that were developed by a group of 40 South Africans from diverse backgrounds about what could happen to the future of land reform in South Africa by the year 2030. Those are just stories, but I take it that some of the inputs or rather information or lessons coming out of those scenarios would have been taken into account in crafting this report. My suggestion is that, that this report be really widely published or publicized so that we can engage with its contents. This is our government. We are more than really ready to engage with its contents and actually to support government in achieving its developmental mandate. As Vumelana, we are ready to really work with government in addressing some of the challenges that are inherent in the land reform space. We are all by now acutely aware that large portions of land that have been given back to our people are unproductive, and it is about time that we really explore and seriously work on ensuring that we involve the private sector in ensuring that such farms can become productive. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. That was, it was supposed to be the last hand, the fifth hand, but I see there is one more hand, so I just want to be fair to you, give you opportunity before we close this round.
All right. Thank you very much, Program Director. Thank you for being democratic as well by recognizing me. My name is Siyabonga Magadla, a young entrepreneur, but also an NEC member of the South African Youth Council, which is an umbrella body for civil society formations. Chair, my question is out of interest. Having looked at the composition of the panel at face value, and I'm not an ageist, but I see that the bulk of the members of the commission, of the high panel, are indeed above youth, they are matured, yes, but above the age limit of young people. Now, out of interest, for the benefit of the youth constituency as well, as you would know that South Africa a couple of years ago, but there is one who looks youthful now. Okay.
I'm sure Mr. Sifuta will also engage with your question. So
yeah, no, thank you very much.
We just wanted you to see his presence.
No, thank you very much, Chair. But I was saying that I think it's a known fact that South Africa a couple of years back already entered what we call a democratic dividend, a youth demographic dividend, which means that the population of young people has indeed increased to levels that needs a thorough investment so that we are able to reap the rewards in the near future. Now, my question is, to what extent does the report speak to specific issues of intervention as it relates to youth development, skilling young people, issues of education, but importantly, issues of enterprise development? Because we know that there's a number of institutions that have been formed targeted at the development of young people, but we still confront a number of challenges with regards to that area. So in terms of the report, to what extent does it cover issues of youth development? Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Siyabonga. I think I can confidently say that you were the last hand, which closes this round. Members of the panel, those were 5 hands, many questions. Dr. Motlanthe,
anyone can start. We can start with Tulani.
Oh.
Yeah. We always do that.
Mr. Tulani Sifuta was a member of the panel, and he seated where other members of the panel who are not here. they are also there and they've already been introduced. You can deal with that one.
Well, thank you very much.
Yes.
Well, the philosophy that is applied throughout the report of the high-level panel is such that we acknowledge the fact that for us to reap the demographic dividend that Siabonga is referring to, we basically need to make investments in the lives of young people now. And we make those investments in the form of education, skills development, labor market penetration, and self-employment through entrepreneurship. And so there is a clearly determined process flow from early childhood development, primary, high school, into even technical, vocational, and education and training system. And so the report is expressing itself on those issues of youth development. And I'm sure that as and when engagements with stakeholders unfold, there can be a dedicated session that brings on board the youth sector and say, what are the implications of the report on youth development, as it were? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sifuta. Dr. Shisana, you want to go next?
Thank you. On the question of the private sector engagement, South Africa, right from 1994, has adopted a mixed economy type of, we've adopted a mixed economy. That means that we have to find ways to integrate the public and the private sector. And we have to do it throughout, in the education area, in the skills development area, in the health area, and even in job creation. If we look at the economy as it is right now, it's suffering because the private sector is not investing its resources in the country. And part of the reason why they are not investing the resources is because of the macroeconomic environment that is not very much supportive. But the other challenge is the question of skills. If South African education system is not good enough to produce the skills that the companies need, they are not going to be able to grow like they would like to grow. You cannot grow the economy without skilled people. So there's a need for the private sector and the education, universities and not technicons, but TVETs, to come together, to work out the curriculum, to say, what do we need? And can you produce those type of people that we need in order that we can be able to employ them? That is not happening. We're finding that a lot of people are coming out of university and TVETs, and they're not able to get jobs simply because of the fact that those jobs require certain skills. The majority of the people that are unemployed do not have any skills, and therefore they cannot be absorbed into the economy. So somehow or other, there's a need to be an endeavor between the education sector and the private sector so that they can be able to align the training to the needs, of the industry. The other problem that we have with regard to the private sector, in my view, is that they tend to create jobs very much at the center in the urban areas where it's much easier for them. But they could also be incentivized to create jobs in the periphery. For example, one of the things that we recommended is that we have special economic zones that are created at the periphery where they would have 100% export. In other words, everything they produce must be exported. And they must be allowed to have expanded public works type of salaries that they are giving to people in the rural areas in order to get them up to speed so that they can be absorbed into the economy. So there are many strategies that can actually be used that will benefit both the private sector as well as the public sector and the population. And I don't think we're doing that much in this country. And the panel is trying very much to make recommendations that hopefully can be implemented.
I would just like to respond to the person who asked for the report to be circulated so people can engage with it. It's actually up on a website, so there are hard copies available. And on the same website are all the background documents, the transcripts of the public hearings, the things that people said, the commissioned research reports, the reports of the roundtables. So that is all available now. I understand that the webpage went live this afternoon. So people can engage with the panel's recommendations easily.
And again, to add to the issue around the concerns around youth development, I think the panel has taken it very seriously, so it cuts across all of the chapters of the report: skills, education, small business development, etc. But even in the social cohesion section, we have made recommendations to amend legislation for those youth who have fallen out of the system, and we know that that is quite a high percentage of people who complete schooling, who start, and the small percentage who complete it, that we create a social safety net for young people that awards second chances. And we've made very precise recommendations to ensure that that happens. As one of the few representatives, we don't represent constituencies as members of the panel, but I do have more recently a private sector background following my stint in government and in research. It is clear, I think, to the private sector that capitalism can no longer merely be extractive, that the inequalities in our country is so stark that business will be forced to come to the table, and indeed I think they have become more willing to come to the table, that a level of trust and cooperation has to be developed so that you can truly have a social compact of business, labor, government and civil society, but specifically behind our development objectives as is outlined in our National Development Plan. It is essential if we are to prepare our country for the fourth industrial revolution that we get all of those parties on board, and business will lag behind at its own peril, but the recent signs are very clear that people in the private sector do understand a greater sense of social responsibility towards poverty alleviation, eradicating inequality, and creating jobs.
Maybe just to respond to the question about the involvement of local government and IDPs. One of the issues that we focused on is this question of spatial inequality, both inequality between the former Bantustans, where poverty is starkly concentrated, and the rest of South Africa, and in the cities, people on the outskirts of the cities and people at the center of the cities. And we're saying that despite there being policy recommendations about the importance of addressing this legacy, a lot of the post-apartheid policies and laws have inadvertently entrenched spatial inequality. So we're calling for a council that would actually combine local government, provincial government, national government, NGOs, and other stakeholders to kind of try and come up with an integrated solution that isn't based just in Department of Human Settlements or Rural Development and Land Affairs, but brings together the different stakeholders to try and cut across this series of constraints and conflicting laws that are re-entrenching spatial inequality, which not only reflects poverty, but predicts poverty and inequality. So we see a very crucial role for local government and the whole IDP process in those plans, which are about structural change. They're not immediately realizable, but we believe that we need a processual approach that will bring together different parties in different ways. And that's one of the benefits of this panel is that we're not acting, we're not confined to specific portfolio committees or specific government departments. We've been able to look at things in a much more cross-cutting way. And one of our recommendations is that there be more ad hoc committees and cross-cutting committees to deal with some of these deeply entrenched problems, societal problems.
Just to indicate before the next response that the website that Dr. Klassen was referring to is www.parliament.gov.za. It's a Parliament official website. Speaker?
Just on a couple of points that have come up in the question and answer session. In relation to whether we are short of drafters of legislation or not, I do want to say that it's a matter that actually comes up in the report, even in what was presented today in terms of high-level issues that were highlighted. With Parliament, as of the third Parliament, we were already very engaged with the issue of ensuring that we did not have to rely on the skills and expertise in the executive. If, in fact, you are really going to conduct proper, independent oversight over the executive. So it's a matter that we're very conscious of, but initially, when we first came to Parliament in 1994, I must say there was a lot of that problem of being dependent on whatever skills. How far we have gone in actually developing the expertise in Parliament, I think it's a matter I'd rather we go and examine and investigate and come back and tell you factual responses in that regard. The other thing we are also very conscious of is that when it comes to public participation, it's something that the Constitution requires of us. It's not a matter where we have a choice. However, very often you will find that there are complications of just keeping up with time frames that you have set yourselves in terms of the program of Parliament. Like, for instance, what was, and in the point that was being made, who was making the point about the fact that you can't say only 1 month's public participation, because often where it gets more complex is when within the process of the National Council of Provinces, issues have to be sent to provinces. And where in fact you had courts commenting and complaining about the public participation, I'm sorry, was because these speakers here have a way of how you conduct public participation when a piece of legislation has come from national, it has gone to all the provinces. It is required to have been referred to certain fora within the province to make sure that members of the provincial legislature are not just waking up in the morning and thinking that this is the position they want to take. They have to make sure that those views are actually coming from the ground inside the province. So it's not a matter of, because they are closing the following day, therefore they must hurry up and come up with a position and make the National Parliament in the form of the National Council of Provinces believe that indeed they've done the public participation and consulted the people on the ground. So it's a matter we're very alive to, and we're very conscious that there has to be a response that in fact responds to our constitutional responsibilities. In the absence of the chairperson of the National Council of Provinces, I must mention that in this year,
where we have been marking 20 years of the Constitution, as well as 20 years of the creation of the National Council of Provinces. One of the issues she has highlighted is the inadequacy of numbers and therefore capacity sometimes that's faced by the NCOP and the processes I was describing, where they've got to refer issues to the ground, to the provinces, and get back something that is authentically from our people. Because there are only 54 of them who are full-time. Sometimes there's a program happening in Parliament, they've got to be in committees, but at the same time, some have to go and actually be in the provinces in terms of the requirement for them to ensure that the proper consultations in the provinces have been satisfied. So these are some of the complexities where these issues of when we think of who we are sending in the NCOP, are we bearing in mind the load and the amount of work that has to be done by those people that are being sent in that house? But secondly, in terms of just the numbers, the sheer numbers and the volume of work that has to be satisfied, to what extent have we been fair in the way we have conceptualized the NCOP and how experience has taught us lessons that we have to reflect on? So I thought I would raise some of those issues. So the question of even what the report is raising requires us to understand it from that perspective. Thank you.
If I may just, Mr. Lowe, to your question regarding public participation, I do believe it's critical that we engage stakeholders, and we do find that the timelines, especially when you get to the end of the year before Parliament rises, there's a flurry of legislation that comes through, and it's always in the quiet period. No one looks at legislation in December. So, you know, we need to adapt the process and actually say we can't allow a timeline to dictate. We need to actually take the legislative imperative and then work it backwards. So we quite vocal on that, but I do recognize that the NCOP has a hell of a workload that they need to get through. But somehow we need to make sure that we involve all our stakeholders in a public participation process that is quite thorough. We now have the Khoisan, and especially in the Western Cape, where I come from, there is a huge issue around when do we get a chance to have our voice made and heard, and you want to hurry things through. And then the relationship between Joe's citizen and the legislatures becomes acrimonious, so we need to find that balance. And I think that is what this report is telling us. It's very detailed, it's very thorough, and it's also very forthright in that it states exactly this, and this is what you should be considering. The challenge, though, is with less than 18 months to go to the next national election, how do we fast-track some of these recommendations to give effect to what has been proposed in the report as it stands today? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Fernandez. Is there any further response?
Thank you. I think the last question is from Tantlan Lovu about the Electoral Act. As you know, our Electoral Act provides for a hybrid of PR and constituency-based elections for local government, but the provincial as well as national elections are only on PR. So the recommendation is that Parliament should investigate the desirability of extending this hybrid system to province and national levels so that it can enhance accountability, because when public representatives are elected directly from a defined constituency, they are likely to stay in dynamic contact with that constituency and therefore be accountable to that constituency. Whereas the proportional representation system, it's the parties that contest elections. And so at the end, the parties have a free hand in drafting the lists and populating those lists with people who may not know how to connect with constituencies. That's the whole rationale behind the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think this brings us to the end of this particular item. So I want to thank the Honorable Speaker. Thank you very much, former State President. Thank you to the Honorable Speakers of the Legislatures, esteemed members of the panel, for the thorough responses. I thank you for all the contributions that have come from the floor. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to the Deputy Speaker.
Thank you very much. The current Pope Francis, when asked by a journalist, so how is it to be a pope? He says, the previous pope did not leave a manual when we left, so I've had to stumble around, make it as I go along. And this was a part of a debate about managing transitions. We have been fortunate that some of the work that the panel ended up doing was an instruction from the Fourth Parliament. So at least that was a guiding thing, not that they left a manual. There are some conventions and ways of doing things that we must look at and so on. So there's no question that this report will constitute an important agenda for the sixth Parliament, whatever is left undone or needs to be completed and so on. But we have to be humble as this fifth Parliament that in dialogue, some of your proposals may be completely embraced, amended, or completely rejected. That's what dialogue is, right? So you enter it with that spirit, so you are much more comfortable. You don't get, what's the word, paralyzed when an objection is made. I'm saying this to suggest to you, ladies and gentlemen, the temptation to start tweeting and on social media and so on, and suggesting that that's the recommendation of the panel, before you read even the executive summary, is very, very attractive. So I'm trying to suggest, let's at least go through those 44 pages of the executive summary before we start entering social media. Because you'll generate such a debate as we'll go to the rest. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say for now. But I want to thank all of you. But journalists, ladies and gentlemen, we request you to continue doing whatever else you want to do, networking across there and so on. We would like to give journalists a few minutes to directly speak to the panel and the speakers. They will take off their microphones because you don't have to hear that. It will be for the journalists and the speakers and the panel. It's not going to be a long one if you are waiting to socialize with the panel and the speakers. So it's not going to be long. My apologies for having warned you in advance, but that's the privilege of running you today. You normally run me.